A fallen soldier's final honor was denied by cold-hearted policies until a nation rose in outrage. Colonel Samuel Hayes had walked through countless airports in his 25 years of service. He had boarded flights bound for foreign bases, flown commercial after exhausting deployments, and escorted fellow soldiers back home for celebrations or farewells. But nothing felt quite like today. As he stood on the edge of the terminal, his polished black shoes clicking quietly against the tile floor, the weight on his chest was heavier than any deployment pack he had ever carried. It wasn't the medals pinned neatly on his uniform that burdened him. It was the duty he carried deep in his soul, escorting Private First Class Noah Mitchell home. Noah had been only 21 years old, a young man full of dreams, laughter, and the unshakable belief that he could make a difference. A son who still called his mother every Sunday. A brother who sent goofy texts late at night. A friend who would give his last dollar to someone in need. And now, Noah was draped beneath the American flag, waiting silently on the tarmac, trusting Samuel to complete the final journey. Samuel adjusted his officer's hat, the brim casting a sharp shadow over his lined face. His hands, steady from years of discipline, briefly trembled as he gripped the orders tucked neatly into his chest pocket. This mission wasn't just paperwork. It wasn't just protocol. It was a promise, the oldest and most sacred one, made by every soldier who wears the uniform. No one gets left behind. He walked through the bustling terminal, unnoticed at first. Families dragged colorful suitcases. Business travelers barked into their phones. Children ran ahead of weary parents, laughter echoing off the high ceilings. Life moved on, unaware that a piece of it had been lost, that somewhere out there a family was waiting, with broken hearts, for a son who would never come home the way they dreamed he would. Samuel's steps were measured and firm. Every part of him screamed respect, from the crease in his slacks to the solemn set of his jaw. Yet as he approached the airline counter, he could already feel the shift, a tightening in the air. A flicker of uncertainty in the agent's eyes as she glanced up, taking in his uniform, the papers he laid carefully before her. "Military escort," Samuel said simply, his voice carrying the gravity of the moment. The agent, young, perhaps too young to fully understand the honor unfolding before her, nodded and began typing into her computer. Samuel waited, hands clasped loosely behind his back, his eyes scanning the busy terminal without really seeing it. His mind wandered to Noah's mother. Had she been able to sleep last night? Had she ironed a suit or picked out a dress to wear when they met him again? Had she clutched a framed photo to her chest, praying that somehow this was all a mistake? The agent frowned at her screen. Samuel noticed the slight tightening around her mouth, the stiffening of her posture. She whispered something to a colleague, and Samuel knew. Something was wrong. He had seen this dance before, not here, not like this, but in distant cities and foreign lands where procedures became excuses and respect was sometimes sacrificed for convenience. "I'm sorry, sir," the agent said, forcing a brittle smile. "There seems to be an issue with your ticket." Samuel felt the eyes of other passengers beginning to drift toward him. A uniform always drew attention, but today the glances lingered longer. He remained still, composed. "I'm escorting a fallen soldier," he said, tapping the orders once more. "Everything is in order." "Yes, sir," she said, "but there are security protocols. We can't allow you to board at this time." Security protocols. The words tasted sour in Samuel's mouth. He knew the airline's handbook better than they thought. There were no protocols barring a military escort from flying with the remains they guarded. This was something else. Something uglier. He took a slow breath, steadying the anger that wanted to rise. Anger wouldn't help Noah. Calm persistence would. "May I speak with your supervisor?" Samuel asked politely. The agent hesitated, then nodded and disappeared behind a partition. Samuel stood tall, unyielding, feeling the curious stares multiplying behind him. He didn't flinch. He wouldn't give anyone the satisfaction of seeing anything less than full honor reflected in his stance. Minutes stretched painfully. People shifted in line, some whispering, some pulling out their phones. Samuel remained silent, rooted not just by duty, but by the unseen weight of Private Mitchell's trust. When the supervisor arrived, he wore a mask of strained professionalism. Apologies were offered. Policies were cited again. No one said the real words aloud, but Samuel had lived long enough, seen enough, to read between the lines. He was being denied not because of paperwork, but because somewhere, someone decided his presence, his mission, was an inconvenience. He could have left. He could have called another officer to take his place, but Samuel Hayes was made of sterner stuff. The oath he had sworn as a young man, the battles he had survived, the soldiers he had carried, all of it rose up within him now, anchoring him to the spot. He would not leave. He would not abandon Private First Class Noah Mitchell, not in life. Not in death, not ever. As he stood there, the world around him shifted. Conversations quieted, camera phones raised, and somewhere deep inside the terminal, the first flickers of outrage and solidarity began to burn. Samuel straightened his shoulders, the brass buttons of his jacket gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights. He was not alone, not truly. The faces watching him, the phones recording, the silent nods of strangers they were beginning to understand. This was not just about a flight. This was about respect, about dignity, about a nation's obligation to its sons and daughters who paid the ultimate price. Samuel Hayes didn't need applause. He didn't need fanfare. He needed a path home for Noah, for every soldier who had given everything. And if that meant standing silent and unyielding in the middle of an indifferent terminal while the world caught up to what should have been instinct, then so be it. He had promised no one would be left behind, and he intended to keep that promise even if he had to do it alone. For now. The agent frowned at her screen. Samuel noticed the slight tightening around her mouth, the stiffening of her posture. She whispered something to a colleague, and Samuel knew. Something was wrong. He had seen this dance before, not here, not like this, but in distant cities and foreign lands where procedures became excuses and respect was sometimes sacrificed for convenience. "I'm sorry, sir," the agent said, forcing a brittle smile. "There seems to be an issue with your ticket." Samuel felt the eyes of other passengers beginning to drift toward him. A uniform always drew attention, but today the glances lingered longer. He remained still, composed. "I'm escorting a fallen soldier," he said, tapping the orders once more. "Everything is in order." "Yes, sir," she said, "but there are security protocols. We can't allow you to board at this time." "Security protocols." The words tasted sour in Samuel's mouth. He knew the airline's handbook better than they thought. There were no protocols barring a military escort from flying with the remains they guarded. This was something else, something uglier. He took a slow breath, steadying the anger that wanted to rise. Anger wouldn't help Noah. Calm persistence would. "May I speak with your supervisor?" Samuel asked politely. The agent hesitated, then nodded and disappeared behind a partition. Samuel stood tall, unyielding, feeling the curious stares multiplying behind him. He didn't flinch. He wouldn't give anyone the satisfaction of seeing anything less than full honor reflected in his stance. Minutes stretched painfully. People shifted in line, some whispering, some pulling out their phones. Samuel remained silent, rooted not just by duty, but by the unseen weight of Private Mitchell's trust. When the supervisor arrived, he wore a mask of strained professionalism. Apologies were offered. Policies were cited again. No one said the real words aloud, but Samuel had lived long enough, seen enough, to read between the lines. He was being denied not because of paperwork, but because somewhere, someone decided his presence, his mission, was an inconvenience. He could have left. He could have called another officer to take his place, but Samuel Hayes was made of sterner stuff. The oath he had sworn as a young man, the battles he had survived, the soldiers he had carried, all of it rose up within him now, anchoring him to the spot. The conversation at the counter grew more tense, the agent's voice lowered to whispers, her gaze darting nervously between Samuel and her screen. Behind him, he could hear passengers murmuring. A few bold ones began filming discreetly with their phones. In the modern world, injustice rarely stayed hidden long, and Samuel knew it. Still, he didn't waver. He stood not just for Noah, but for every soldier who had ever been left behind by a system too busy or too blind to honor their sacrifice. The supervisor's words grew more defensive, the explanations more convoluted. "It's just a technical glitch, sir," he offered weakly. "Nothing personal." Nothing personal. Samuel almost allowed himself a grim smile. In his experience, nothing personal was the universal excuse for all manner of cowardice. A child clung to her mother's hand nearby, wide eyes staring up at the man in uniform who wasn't being allowed to board. Somewhere, in the back of the line, a veteran in a faded USMC hat muttered something under his breath. Samuel caught it. Disgraceful. Still, Samuel said nothing. His silence spoke louder than outrage could. He represented more than himself now. Every second he stood there was a testament to resilience, to duty, to the unbreakable spirit that kept men like Noah Mitchell from being forgotten. Finally, the supervisor offered a half-hearted smile. "If you could just wait over there, sir, we'll see what we can do." Wait. As if Noah's homecoming could be delayed like a missed connection or a lost suitcase. Samuel's jaw tightened, but he gave a single sharp nod and stepped aside, never turning his back to the counter. Behind him, the murmurs grew. The air felt heavier, charged with a growing sense of injustice. And Samuel knew in his bones that the quiet tide of discontent was rising. He wasn't alone. And neither was Noah. Not anymore. It started with a sharp voice cutting through the terminal noise. "This isn't right," a woman called out. Heads turned, phones lifted higher. The woman, middle-aged and fierce, stepped forward from the crowd. "This man is trying to bring a fallen soldier home," she said, her voice shaking slightly with anger. "And you're making him wait like he's nothing?" Her words seemed to ignite something. A man near the coffee kiosk chimed in. "My brother served. He deserves better." Another voice. "We all deserve better than this." The quiet indignation swelled into open outrage. Passengers, once content to mind their own business, now stood together. They approached the counter, surrounding Samuel in a loose but determined semicircle. The agent shrank behind her computer screen, glancing anxiously at the growing crowd. Phones were everywhere now, live streams, photos, tweets, hashtags like "Honor Our Heroes" and "Arch, Let Him Fly" exploded across social media in real time. A young woman, barely 20, wearing a university sweatshirt, wiped tears from her eyes as she held up her phone. "I'm recording this," she said firmly. "Everyone needs to see how they treat our soldiers." The tension was electric. The airline staff, once dismissive, now looked terrified. A manager rushed over, speaking in hushed, frantic tones into his radio. "We'll get this resolved," he said, sweating under the scrutiny. "We just need a few minutes." But the crowd was done waiting. An older gentleman, wearing a Vietnam veteran cap, stepped up beside Samuel. He didn't say a word, just stood there, a silent wall of solidarity. Then another. And another. Veterans, travelers, mothers with children, teenagers fresh from college visits, all surrounding Colonel Hayes in a protective ring. Someone started clapping. Slowly at first, one pair of hands, then another. Then 100. The terminal filled with the sound of applause, fierce and unrelenting. Samuel's throat tightened. He hadn't asked for this, hadn't wanted it, but standing there, surrounded by strangers who refused to stay silent, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Across the terminal, news crews rushed in, tipped off by viral posts. Cameras rolled. Microphones thrust forward. Reporters shouted questions. "Colonel Hayes, how do you feel about being denied boarding? Do you believe this was discrimination?" Samuel raised a hand, silencing them. "This isn't about me," he said simply. "It's about Private First Class Noah Mitchell. It's about every soldier who gave everything and deserves to be brought home with honor." The crowd roared in approval. The manager stammered an apology. "We've arranged immediate boarding, sir, first class." "On us." But Samuel didn't move. He turned to the crowd, his unexpected battalion, and nodded once, deeply. "Thank you," he said. "Not for me, for him." And with that, flanked by veterans and cheered by strangers, Colonel Samuel Hayes escorted Noah Mitchell toward the gate. Not alone. Never alone. Not anymore. By the time Colonel Samuel Hayes and the silent battalion of strangers had made their stand in the terminal, the world beyond those walls had already begun to stir. What started as a handful of phone cameras flashing in outrage had quickly transformed into a wildfire that no corporate statement or quiet apology could hope to contain. A college student named Emily Turner, with a modest following of a few thousand, was the first to post a live video. Her hands trembled slightly as she narrated what she was seeing. A decorated colonel, denied boarding, while escorting a fallen soldier home. Her caption read, "This is not the America I believe in. Honor our heroes." Within minutes, her video was picked up by larger accounts. Veteran organizations reposted it. Influential voices added their condemnation. News outlets, hungry for real-time drama, began embedding the clips directly into their home pages. The hashtags "Let Him Fly" and "Respect Our Troops" trended within the hour. From small towns in Ohio to bustling cafes in Manhattan, people were glued to their screens, shaking their heads in disbelief. Retired generals tweeted their outrage. Celebrities lent their platforms to spread the story wider. Talk show hosts teased upcoming segments devoted to the incident, The nation's conscience had been pricked, and it bled red, white, and blue. Back inside the terminal, Samuel remained stoic, unaware of the scale of the storm building beyond. His focus stayed locked on Private First Class Noah Mitchell, on the sacred promise that no fallen soldier would be left behind. Airline executives, however, were all too aware. Boardrooms buzzed with frantic energy. Emergency meetings convened. Public relations teams crafted statements they knew would sound hollow. Damage control had begun, but the tide was already too strong. On Facebook, a veteran advocacy group launched a petition demanding accountability. It gathered 100,000 signatures within 2 hours. Parents posted stories of their own sons and daughters in uniform, tying their personal grief and pride to the outrage swelling across the nation. Cable news ran banner headlines: "Decorated Colonel denied boarding while escorting fallen soldier." Pundits debated it live, voices raised, emotions raw. No one could believe it. Everyone had an opinion. In homes across America, kitchen tables and living rooms buzzed with conversations about respect, about sacrifice, about what it meant to honor service. The incident had transcended a single terminal. It had become a mirror, reflecting how easily the important things could be forgotten in the rush of everyday life. Meanwhile, inside the airport, passengers refreshed their phones constantly. They showed Samuel screenshots of tweets, comments, video shares, their faces a mixture of anger and hope. Some had tears in their eyes. A little boy approached, no older than 10, holding his father's hand. In his other hand, he clutched a small American flag, the kind given out at 4th of July parades. "Thank you, sir," the boy said, voice shy but clear. Samuel knelt briefly to meet his gaze, offering a small but firm nod. "Thank you, son." The boy's father, a veteran himself, judging by the subtle Marine insignia on his jacket, saluted Samuel quietly before leading his son back into the gathering crowd. In the command centers of social media platforms, algorithms lit up with the rapid-fire acceleration of the story. Trending monitors blinked red. Advertising executives debated whether to pull placements from the airline, fearing backlash by association. The airline's first official statement stumbled out just past noon. It was a bland apology, citing confusion and internal miscommunication, but it was too little, too late. Screenshots of the statement flooded Twitter within minutes, accompanied by scathing responses. Confusion doesn't drape a flag over a casket. Miscommunication didn't pin medals on his chest. Respect isn't optional. By the afternoon, shareholders of the airline were raising alarms. Early market predictions showed a potential dip in stock price. Public trust, once eroded, would not be so easily rebuilt. Inside the terminal, Samuel's phone buzzed against his chest. A message from Major Daniel Cross flashed across the screen. "Hold steady. Help is coming." Samuel allowed himself a small smile. It wasn't a victory yet, but reinforcements were on the way. Outside, protesters began arriving at nearby airport terminals, waving flags and signs demanding respect for the troops. Some knelt in silent tribute. Others sang patriotic songs, their voices echoing through the wide, sterile halls. A television screen above the gate blared coverage of the unfolding story. Samuel saw himself on the screen standing proud, unwavering as anchors recounted the timeline of the morning's events. And still, Samuel stayed focused. This wasn't about fame. It wasn't about punishing an airline. It was about fulfilling the sacred trust between a nation and its defenders. Private First Class. Noah Mitchell deserved to go home with dignity. And because a few good people refused to stay silent, because technology allowed a spark of outrage to ignite a wildfire of solidarity, that dignity would not be denied. As the airline's CEO prepared to issue a second, more groveling apology live on national television, Samuel finally received the news he'd been waiting for. A private military transport had been arranged. A proper escort, a proper honor. No more delays. No more excuses. Samuel adjusted the brim of his hat, squared his shoulders, and turned to the crowd that had fought for him without even knowing his name. "Thank you," he said simply, voice strong. The terminal erupted in cheers. And somewhere far above, perhaps Noah Mitchell watched it all unfold, knowing he had not been forgotten. Not today. Not ever. As the cheers continued to reverberate through the terminal, the tide of public opinion surging stronger by the minute, a new presence arrived at the airport, one that carried its own gravity, its own undeniable authority. 2 military SUVs pulled up to a side entrance. From them stepped a team of sharply dressed officers, their uniforms crisp, their faces set in determined lines. Leading them was Major Daniel Cross, a man known for his unshakable resolve and deep sense of duty. Word of the incident had traveled fast, and the Department of the Army had decided enough was enough. Major Cross moved with purpose through the terminal, his polished boots clicking against the tile, his gaze sweeping the gathered crowd. Cameras turned, news crews pivoted their microphones toward him, sensing the escalation. He found Samuel Hayes standing steadfast at the center of it all, surrounded by passengers who had become his shield. Major Cross approached and extended his hand. "Colonel Hayes," he said firmly, "we've come to bring you and Private First Class Noah Mitchell home." Samuel took the offered hand in a strong grip. No words were needed between them. In that handshake was a shared understanding of duty, of sacrifice, of the unbreakable bonds formed by service. The airline representatives, who had previously hidden behind their counters and corporate platitudes, now scrambled forward. Their manager, face flushed and voice trembling, tried to intervene. We've arranged a first-class seat for the colonel," he stammered, "and we're deeply sorry for any inconvenience." Major Cross turned slowly to face him, his voice cutting through the noise like a blade. "With all due respect, this soldier doesn't need your first-class seat. He needs the dignity and respect he has earned, and he will have it on our terms, not yours." The manager shrank back, nodding quickly. Passengers cheered again, their support echoing off the terminal walls. Major Cross gestured toward the private gate where the military transport awaited. "Colonel, when you're ready." Samuel took a deep breath, then turned to the crowd that had stood with him through the storm. "Thank you," he said simply. "Thank you for not staying silent." Mothers hugged their children tighter. Veterans saluted. Strangers wiped tears from their eyes. As Samuel began his walk toward the private gate, the crowd parted respectfully, forming a solemn corridor of honor. The silence was profound, broken only by the occasional sniffle, the rustle of flags being raised in tribute. A young woman with a live streaming phone whispered into her mic, "They're giving him the send-off he deserves." Samuel carried himself with quiet pride, each step measured, each breath steady. Behind him, members of the crowd followed, not out of obligation, but out of solidarity. They were witnesses to a moment larger than themselves, and they refused to let it pass unnoticed. At the private gate, military personnel stood at attention. Beyond the glass, the transport plane waited a sleek, somber machine designed not for speed or luxury, but for honor. Major Cross placed a firm hand on Samuel's shoulder. "We'll handle everything from here, Colonel. You can ride with Private Mitchell." Samuel nodded, emotion tightening his throat. Inside the plane, a single casket rested, draped in the American flag. Soldiers stood guard, their faces solemn, their backs straight. Samuel approached the casket, removing his hat and placing it respectfully against his chest. He bowed his head, offering a silent prayer. "You're going home, son," he whispered. As Samuel took his seat beside Noah's casket, the engines rumbled to life. The plane began to taxi, leaving behind a terminal forever changed. Back inside, passengers watched through the windows, many with hands pressed against the glass, offering silent farewells. Cameras captured every moment, broadcasting it live to a nation hungry for reminders of what true honor looked like. Social media exploded again, this time with messages of pride, of unity, of respect. Images of Samuel beside Noah's casket flooded timelines. Hashtags shifted from outrage to celebration. Welcome home, honor restored, never forgotten. In the days that followed, the airline issued multiple apologies, launched internal reviews, and pledged to overhaul its policies regarding military escorts. But the damage had been done. Their name was forever associated with a failure to honor those who had given everything. Meanwhile, Samuel Hayes and Noah Mitchell completed their journey. In a small town, draped in flags and lined with mourners, Noah's family waited. As Samuel stepped off the plane, he was met by tearful embraces, grateful words, and heartfelt salutes. He stood silently as the casket was carried past rows of veterans, each one offering a final salute. He stood silently as a mother clutched her son's folded flag to her chest, weeping not just for her loss, but for the love shown by strangers. He stood silently, knowing he had kept his promise. No one had been left behind. And as the sun dipped low, casting golden light over the town, Samuel allowed himself a small, weary smile. Because in a divided world, in a country often pulled apart by politics and prejudice, the people had chosen to stand for something greater. They had chosen to stand for honor. And because of that, hope endured. In the immediate aftermath of the flight's departure, the airline's crisis only deepened. What had begun as a shameful incident, confined to one airport terminal, had exploded into a national scandal that no amount of corporate spin could contain. The first signs of trouble appeared on Wall Street the next morning. Shares of the airline began to slide, initially by a few percentage points, but quickly gathering momentum as investors realized the public outrage was not subsiding. News anchors speculated openly about long-term damage to the airline's brand. Financial analysts downgraded their stock ratings. The company's once rosy quarterly projections turned grim almost overnight. The airline's executives, previously insulated from the consequences of frontline decisions, found themselves summoned to emergency board meetings. PowerPoint presentations filled with damage control strategies were thrown together in haste. Consultants were called in, their fees soaring along with the panic. But no graph or marketing slogan could erase the viral videos, the image of Colonel Hayes standing proud as passengers cheered around him, or the casket draped in the flag that symbolized a promise the airline had so blatantly broken. The CEO issued a second, more emotional apology during a televised press conference, standing stiffly at a podium adorned with the airline's logo. He read from a prepared statement, his voice trembling slightly as he spoke about regrettable failures and a renewed commitment to honoring those who serve. But the public wasn't interested in platitudes. They wanted accountability. In the days that followed, flight cancellations surged. Customers demanded refunds, many citing a refusal to support a company that disrespected its military heroes. Competitors quickly seized the opportunity, offering discounted fares to veterans and their families, emphasizing their own long-standing commitments to service members. Boycotts were organized online. Hashtags like #boycott, the airline, and Respect Our Troops dominated social media platforms. Viral videos showing travelers cutting up their loyalty cards amassed millions of views. Class action lawsuits loomed on the horizon, filed not only by veterans' organizations but by civilian advocacy groups enraged by the deeper issue, a perceived corporate culture that prioritized bureaucracy over basic human decency. Veterans groups staged peaceful protests outside the airline's headquarters, carrying signs that read, "Honor, not excuses," and "Heroes deserve better." Their silent presence was a powerful indictment, broadcast live across every major network. News outlets dug deeper, uncovering previous complaints from veterans who felt disrespected or mishandled by airline staff. Each new revelation chipped away further at public trust. Congressional hearings were proposed. Senators and representatives called for new legislation mandating protections for military escorts traveling with fallen soldiers. In televised interviews, politicians from both sides of the aisle expressed outrage, a rare moment of unity in a divided nation. Meanwhile, internal emails leaked from within the airline revealed executives' early attempts to minimize the incident, prioritizing public relations optics over genuine accountability. The backlash to those leaks was swift and brutal. Stock prices cratered. The airline's largest shareholders demanded resignations. Within weeks, several top executives, including the CEO who had fumbled the public apology, stepped down to pursue other opportunities, according to carefully worded press releases. But for many Americans, the damage was done. Trust, once lost, is not easily regained. On the ground, frontline employees, flight attendants, gate agents, pilots bore the brunt of public anger. Many expressed sorrow and frustration, explaining that they had no control over corporate policies. Some even wore small pins on their uniforms that read, "We stand with our soldiers," attempting to distance themselves from the decisions made by those in corner offices. Other airlines capitalized further, launching massive marketing campaigns centered around patriotism and respect for service members. Flights now opened with announcements honoring veterans on board. Airport lounges set aside special spaces for military personnel. New partnerships with veteran organizations blossomed seemingly overnight. The disgraced airline tried to keep up, instituting sweeping reforms. They established a military honor division, promising special training for employees handling military escorts. They announced millions of dollars in donations to veterans' charities. Yet, every move was met with cynicism, seen not as genuine contrition, but as desperate attempts at image rehabilitation. Meanwhile, the passengers from that fateful day, the ones who had stood with Colonel Hayes, became minor celebrities in their own right. Interviews with them aired across the nation, their voices resonating with everyday Americans who understood that the issue was bigger than a single soldier or a single airline. It was about values. It was about what America stood for. And it was about the collective power of ordinary people refusing to accept injustice. In a CNN town hall, one of the passengers, an elderly Marine veteran, summed it up best. It wasn't about politics. It wasn't about making noise. It was about doing the right thing when it mattered. Colonel Samuel Hayes, for his part, returned quietly to his duties after ensuring Noah Mitchell was laid to rest with full honors. He declined most interview requests, preferring to let the story belong to the people who had made the difference. In his only public statement, released through a veterans advocacy group, he wrote simply, "Honor is not an act of convenience. It is a duty." To every American who stood up when it would have been easier to look away, thank you. You reminded the nation that we are better together. And with those words, the chapter closed not just on a scandal, but on a lesson the country sorely needed to remember. A lesson about respect, about courage, and about the simple, powerful truth that in America, when enough people stand together, honor will always find a way. In the days and weeks following the viral storm, America found itself reflecting on more than just an airline's failure. The incident had become a mirror, forcing a nation to examine its collective values, its willingness to stand for those who had stood for them. Across coffee shops, living rooms, and public squares, people talked not just about what had happened, but about why it mattered so deeply. It wasn't about a single flight or a single soldier. It was about honor. It was about dignity. It was about the quiet promises that stitched the fabric of a nation together, promises too often taken for granted. The story of Colonel Samuel Hayes and Private First Class Noah Mitchell lived on, not because of the outrage it sparked, but because of the hope it rekindled. Hope that in a divided world, Americans could still unite around something pure and powerful. Hope that ordinary people, when faced with injustice, would still choose to do the right thing. Veterans' halls across the country saw record turnouts. Communities organized parades to honor their local heroes. Schools incorporated lessons about respect for service members into their curriculums. Churches held special services to pray for the families of the fallen. Social media, often criticized for its divisiveness, became a tool for healing. Posts celebrating soldiers, first responders, and everyday acts of courage flooded timelines. Hashtags shifted from anger to gratitude. Thank you for your service. Honor restored. Better together. The airline, while struggling to recover its reputation, quietly funded a nationwide campaign promoting acts of kindness, focusing on stories that uplifted and united rather than divided. Though many viewed it as damage control, others recognized that real change, however it begins, can still carry meaning. Colonel Hayes, ever the quiet professional, returned to his duties with little fanfare. Yet his presence carried a different weight now. When he walked through an airport terminal, strangers approached with handshakes and heartfelt thanks. Veterans saluted. Parents pointed him out to their children, teaching them that real heroes don't wear capes, they wear commitment. He continued to escort fallen soldiers home, each journey a sacred mission. But now, every step he took was echoed by millions who understood the importance of his role. In a rare interview months later, Samuel spoke not of the incident, but of the values it illuminated. Sitting under the warm sun outside a small-town VFW hall, he said, "Honor isn't something you demand. It's something you carry. It's in how you live, how you treat others, how you stand when standing is hard." Noah Mitchell gave everything. "I just did what any soldier would do. I stood for him." He paused, glancing at the American flag fluttering nearby. What happened wasn't about me. It was about reminding us all of who we are at our best. Not perfect, not without flaws, but willing to stand for each other. To lift each other up. Those words resonated far beyond that quiet afternoon. They were quoted in newspapers, shared on social media, printed on posters and murals. In classrooms, teachers asked students what honor meant to them. In city halls, mayors read proclamations celebrating service and sacrifice. At kitchen tables, families talked about values, about promises, about the quiet courage needed not just on battlefields, but in everyday life. A national day of remembrance was proposed not just for those who fell in battle, but for those moments when a nation chooses to rise together. Colonel Hayes and the passengers who had stood beside him were invited to the White House, where they received Presidential Medals of Freedom for their extraordinary demonstration of American values and courage. Standing on the steps of the Rose Garden, Samuel accepted the honor with humility, dedicating it to every soldier who never came home and every American who refused to let their memory fade. The final legacy of that day wasn't the downfall of an airline or the viral fame of a single story. It was a quiet, steadfast reminder planted deep in the American heart that honor matters, that respect must never be conditional, that when people stand together, injustice has nowhere to hide, and most of all, that the promises made to those who serve to remember them, to respect them, to carry them home with dignity, are promises written not just in policy, but in the soul of a nation. As the seasons turned and the years moved forward, the echoes of that moment remained. Every airport terminal, every small-town parade, every folded flag handed to a grieving mother carried with it the memory of what had happened and the commitment that it would never happen again. Because when honor is defended not by orders, but by choice, not by power, but by people, it becomes unstoppable. It becomes the true measure of a nation's character. And in that measure, America had proven it could still rise. Life has a way of testing what we truly stand for. The story of Colonel Samuel Hayes reminds us that honor is not just a word stitched onto a uniform, it's a commitment we live every day. In a world moving faster than ever, it is easy to overlook the quiet promises that bind a nation together. Respect, loyalty, and the courage to stand for what is right. This story teaches us that no act of dignity is too small. Whether standing up for a stranger, defending the truth, or simply choosing kindness when it's easier to stay silent, we shape the world our children will inherit. True honor isn't demanded. It's shown in the moments no one expects and everyone remembers. At any age, we can be a witness to injustice or a defender of what's right. It's never too late to choose the latter. When we stand together, for those who have sacrificed everything, we remind ourselves and the world that integrity still matters. And that is a legacy worth leaving behind.